My dad used to let me walk inside the refrigerator. It seemed completely normal. The place was enormous. High ceilings, endless aisles, and a cart that was always fuller than expected. I would race towards whoever was handing out free samples, hoping for something warm, ravioli maybe. And if my dad added it to the cart, it felt like a small victory. On the way out, we'd get pizza. Cheap, oversized, always the same. Then into the car, full and a little sleepy, listening to my dad explain once again why Costco's gas prices were unbeatable. See, when you grow up on one side of the economy, but then work on the other, you start to see what gets lost in translation. So let's fast forward maybe 15 years. I'm sitting in an investment committee meeting, pitching a consumer retail company, like I'd done many times before. This one sold household appliances. Good quality, affordable, and the kind of stuff people actually used. I liked the story. But the pushback comes fast. My peers wave it off as low-tech, unexciting, and something they thought no one would want to buy. And I start to object. I want to tell them it's sold at Costco. My parents own these products. I own them too. But I stop myself because I realize something that feels obvious to me doesn't register at all in this room. What I grew up seeing as normal, trusted, and dependable simply didn't exist here. And this pushback, it's not analytical, it's cultural. So in rooms like this, we discuss consumers and aggregates and averages. We debate spending power, income brackets, macro trends, but we rarely discuss how people actually experience the economy. What feels affordable, what feels risky, what feels worth trusting. When you miss that, you don't just miss great investments, you can build the wrong thesis. So in recent years, we've been seeing a gap between the economy we measure and the one people actually live in. So consumer sentiment sits near decade lows, yet the top 10% of households now account for nearly half of all US spending. From an investor's lens, growth looks strong, but it's concentrated at the top. For the majority of households, life feels uncertain and expensive. But in a place like Costco, the consumer economy shows up in line items instead of narratives. Price per unit labels, staples that last, trade-offs you can see and feel. It makes life feel manageable. Now, imagine this is your week. You've already done the mental math more times than you can count. Gas to get to work, groceries that cost more, even when the bags feel lighter, and that one unexpected bill you're hoping doesn't show up. Same job, same hours, but prices have gone up enough that there's no room for error. It's the end of the day and your kids are hungry and they're looking at you, not worried, just trusting. You're not seeking advice, you're looking for one small moment of relief. Scrolling on your phone, half paying attention when the new Kellogg's campaign appears, cereal for dinner, framed as a smart, practical response to rising food prices. And you pause. Not because it's clever, but because of what it implies. That coping means lowering the bar again. That dinner, something you've always viewed as a given, is suddenly negotiable. No one says it, but you hear it anyway. Get used to this. Now picture the alternative. McDonald's brings back a $5 meal deal, a price you remember from back before everything felt like a trade-off. It's not healthy, it's not perfect, but it's dinner. It's filling and it's predictable, and for once, the number on the sign doesn't feel like it's punishing you. These two very real marketing campaigns landed very differently. One told consumers how to adapt to inflation, and the other absorbed a small piece of it with them. That difference matters. When people say the economy feels bad, they're not missing data. They're describing a reality that our tools and instincts often fail to capture. So when Americans are asked how the economy is doing, their answers are strikingly bleak. In recent polls, roughly 74% described economic conditions as fair or poor. 57% have said the economy is in a recession, even when technically it isn't. And just 17% say they trust the federal government to do what's right most of the time. That is the lowest level in 7 decades. So by any measure, this is a crisis of confidence. But at the same time, unemployment's around 4%, GDP is growing 3% year over year, and the stock market has surged. Fundamentals are strong, sentiment is not. That's not just a blip, it's a structural change, and it has consequences. Even the Federal Reserve has acknowledged that traditional measures of consumer confidence no longer map cleanly onto spending patterns. Sentiment remains deeply negative even while consumption is strong. Okay, now let's take Walmart, for example. They actually just reported a record quarter and consumer spending looks strong. But buried in that same report, majority of share gains are coming from households earning over $100,000. For households earning below $50K, wallets are stretched. People are living paycheck to paycheck. Same quarter, same company, two economic realities, only one showed up in the headline numbers. Walmart didn't invent that dynamic, they simply reported it. So when sentiment and spending stop telling the same story, decisions break down, because the language of GDP and CPI doesn't map to the language of rent, groceries, and insurance premiums. And if we continue to ignore that gap or treat it as ignorance, we will miss the signal entirely. If we continue to separate measurement from lived reality, we don't just risk misunderstanding the economy, we will design it around signals that fewer and fewer people identify with. So what can we do differently? 1, ask better questions. Trade blame for clarity. So when economic stories don't line up, we reach for easy explanations. People are bad with money, data is misleading, corporations are greedy. But most economic tension isn't about intent, it's about purchasing power. How far does a dollar actually stretch? It's a harder question and a more honest one. It shifts the blame from who's at fault to what's actually happening. Costco doesn't argue about inflation. It shows you in price per unit labels, fewer SKUs, clear trade-offs. And that level of transparency doesn't just save money, it builds trust. 2, consistency matters most when margins are thin. So that Costco hot dog has cost $1.50 since 1985. That $9.99 pizza is still absurdly cheap. The deal is the deal, and it has been for 40 years. That is the opposite of what most brands do under pressure. So costs rise, prices shift, portions shrink, the deal quietly gets worse. People notice, and that's when trust starts to erode. My dad drives 20 minutes out of his way to get gas from Costco. Not because it's always the cheapest, but because it's reliable. And when things are running tight, that predictability is a form of relief. Do it long enough and relief becomes trust, and trust becomes loyalty. Turns out consistency is a strategy too. The question for anyone building products, policies, or companies isn't whether or not you can afford to be consistent, it's whether or not your customers can afford it if you're not. 3, prioritize empathy over persuasion. So that when someone tries to tell you the economy feels bad, don't try to convince or talk them out of their reality. Ask what could make the next decision easier. If you notice, Costco never tries to convince you or talk you into buying something new. They just hand you a sample. But somehow that one small gesture does more for trust than any policy, any campaign, any well-reasoned argument, because it's not about food, it's about what it signals. I'm not here to convince you, I'm here to show you. That is what paying close attention really means. Seeing where people lean in, where they pull back, where they hesitate. Meet people where they actually are, not where your models say they should be. They need fewer surprises and someone willing to take that first small risk on their behalf. If you ever need a reminder, try grabbing a cart and walking the grocery aisle. Oh, and for anyone here who has never experienced the magic of Costco, I left you guys something under your seat. Consider it a sample. Thank you.